It's a constant stream of censor clouds. Haigusu, the United States Secretary of Defense. Oh, I guess now it's the Secretary of War. Haigusu, the United States Secretary of War, announced that preparations to overthrow the Maduro regime are complete. Venezuela responded by flying 2 fighter jets over a United States Navy ship to show force. Tensions are increasing. Let's examine the situation and review what's happening. I've mentioned this before, so I think many of you already know that a large number of United States Navy ships have gathered near Venezuelan waters. The United States has sent 8 warships near Venezuela, apparently increasing pressure on the country. It was recently confirmed that these United States Navy ships are now fully operational. The United States Navy released footage of an attack on a drug-carrying vessel from Venezuela. President Trump claimed that 11 cartel members heading to the United States were eliminated. United States Secretary of State Rubio, visiting Mexico, commented on the vessel sinking, saying seizing drug-carrying ships was ineffective and the only way to stop them was to blow them up. Secretary of State Rubio also raised the prospect of more attacks on the cartel. At this point, Venezuela appeared directly threatened. President Maduro of Venezuela made it clear that he would not back down. At a September 1st press conference, he stressed that United States warships with about 1,200 missiles are targeting us, calling it a clear act of war provocation. He went on to describe the actions of the United States as bloody intimidation and tried to raise the issue with the international community. At the same time, he declared that they would maintain the highest level of defense posture against the threat from the United States. President Maduro then launched a nationwide voluntary enlistment campaign to boost patriotism and expanded the militia to strengthen combat forces. At the same time, their naval vessels were deployed forward into the northern territorial waters, showing movements that seem to take into account the possibility of an actual clash. President Maduro says these countermeasures aren't an overreaction, but a response to the United States aiming for regime change in Venezuela, and he's working to rally his supporters. And on September 4th, an incredible statement was made. Secretary of Defense Hexes said preparations for a regime change in Venezuela are complete. Secretary of Defense Hexes told Fox News they are ready to use all United States military resources to overthrow the Maduro regime. He also called President Maduro the leader of a narco state. Cooperation with neighbors is being strengthened. The United States Secretary of State and Ecuadorian Foreign Minister announced at a joint press conference that the United States would provide $28 billion in security aid to help tackle Ecuador's rising crime. He went on to say that the governments of partner countries could directly carry out attacks against criminal organizations, and in such cases, the United States would support them. He also mentioned that if Ecuador requests it, the establishment of a United States military base could be considered. Ecuador allowed foreign military bases after a constitutional amendment on June 3rd. It seems that the United States and Ecuador had already reached an agreement in advance. In fact, Ecuador's public safety has worsened significantly recently as cartels have expanded into the area. There have been frequent clashes between cartels over drug transportation routes, especially in coastal cities. Several terrorist attacks on politicians and police officers have led Ecuador to partner with the United States to address these issues. Colombia and the Dominican Republic have partnered with the United States for joint operations. A recent incident illustrates this well. The Colombian Aerospace Force detected suspicious activity at sea. An unidentified vessel was moving at high speed along an alternate route instead of the usual course, which matched the typical pattern of a drug smuggling boat. The Colombian military quickly shared the coordinates with the United States and the Dominican Republic, and all three activated their joint command system in real time. What happened next was like a scene from a movie. The situation unfolded urgently. The Dominican Republic quickly sent fighter jets to block the fishing vessel and dispatched naval ships to tighten the encirclement. After several chases, the fishing vessel was eventually forced to stop and the crew members were arrested. A search of the fishing vessel uncovered about 448 kilograms of drugs. This wasn't just one bust, it exposed the scale of the cartel's maritime smuggling network. What's interesting is that Colombia's response to this is somewhat contradictory. Colombia has so far followed an independent path driven by anti-American sentiment. However, as the drug cartel problem in their country became too serious, they eventually faced the reality that it would be difficult to solve it without cooperation with the United States. The Colombian government set aside its pride and cooperated with the United States to urgently eradicate the cartels. Therefore, this incident has broader implications than a drug crackdown. With Colombia, the Dominican Republic, and the United States now fully implementing their cooperation, similar joint operations will likely occur more often in this region. This also means pressure on Venezuela could rise even more, but it didn't end there. Facing intense pressure, Venezuela has begun to show its military strength. Recently, the Venezuelan Air Force launched its F-16 fighter jets and carried out a provocative low-altitude flight over a United States Navy vessel deployed in waters near Venezuela. This is interpreted as a clear military demonstration that anyone in the international community can recognize, and as an action showing Venezuela's determination to confront United States pressure head-on. In particular, this show of force means more than just a display of air power. Venezuela was forced to defend itself because of United States military pressure. This action sends a clear message to the international community that Venezuela will no longer accept things passively. What's interesting is that neither the United States nor Venezuela has released an official statement yet, but this silence is actually increasing the tension. The United States may consider the Venezuelan Air Force's threatening flyover of its warship a military provocation, possibly prompting countermeasures. Venezuela, however, can claim it's a sovereign right to defend its honor and territory. Above all, what's important is that the possibility of this military standoff leading to an actual conflict is increasing. The Caribbean is quickly becoming a flashpoint as United States bases, Venezuelan naval vessels, and Air Force power increasingly intertwine. It's now a powder keg where any spark could trigger full-scale war. This incident will likely be remembered as a decisive moment highlighting rising tensions between the United States and Venezuela, rather than just a show of force. Of course, there is growing support for the interpretation that such strong pressure on Venezuela is more for domestic and international political purposes than for drug eradication. Drugs enter the United States through various routes. 1,400 tons move via Guatemala, while Venezuela distributes about 200 to 250 tons daily. Drugs are typically produced and transported via Mexico, leading some to argue that drug eradication is just a pretext. This lets them display military power globally, gauge neighbors' reactions, and more easily enforce immigration deportation policies at home. That explains their hardline stance. And another key factor that can't be left out in the conflict surrounding Venezuela is Russia and China. It's not just a confrontation between the United States and Venezuela. The fact that these two major powers are backing them makes the situation much more complicated and dangerous. For example, China strongly opposes the rising pressure on Venezuela. First of all, Russia has maintained a close military cooperation with Venezuela for a long time. In fact, a significant portion of Venezuela's main military assets are Russian-made. It is known that Russia has gone beyond simply exporting weapons and has sent military advisors to support the training and operations of the Venezuelan military. A few years back, Russia sent strategic bombers to Caracas to demonstrate strength against the United States. For Russia, Venezuela is a key outpost showing its influence in the Western Hemisphere. China also has an inseparable relationship with Venezuela. In the past decade, China has given Venezuela hundreds of billions in financial support and investment, mainly through oil-backed loans. When Venezuela faced difficulties in securing foreign currency due to its economic crisis, China supported the Venezuelan economy in exchange for a stable supply of crude oil. If the Venezuelan regime falls, China's major investments and resource strategy could be severely impacted. Therefore, China cannot simply stand by and watch this situation unfold. Ultimately, the fact that the interests of Russia and China are involved clearly shows that this situation is not just a conflict between the United States and Venezuela, but rather a facet of the new Cold War structure. If the United States tries to overthrow the regime, Russia and China will likely back Venezuela with military supplies, diplomatic pressure, and economic aid, even if they don't intervene militarily. This has raised fears the crisis could spread beyond Latin America and impact the global system. In the end, this conflict is not just a simple regional dispute, but part of a power struggle over the world order, which is further heightening tensions in the international community. Everyone, how do you see the current situation between the United States and Venezuela, and what do you think will happen in the future? Please share your thoughts in the comments. That's all for this video, thank you.